Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Across the Fence, I'm Fran Stoddard. Up and down the state of Vermont, farmers grow an abundance of fruits and vegetables. But when it comes to time to harvest those crops like kale, chard, or apples, domestic workers are often in short supply. That's why the federal government created H-2A Temporary Agriculture Workers Program. The program helps American farmers fill employment gaps by hiring workers from other countries. In Vermont, about 11% of farm workers is accomplished by H-2A seasonal workers. A majority of those workers, approximately 400 individuals, are from the country of Jamaica. To learn more about that country, its culture, and its people, we're joined by a native of Jamaica, the director of UVM Extension and Associate Dean in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, Roy Beckford. Good afternoon, Dr. Beckford, and thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon, Fran, and thanks for having me again.
Yes, it's great to see you. So let's start with just a quick geography check. Jamaica is a Caribbean island about 2,000 miles south of Vermont.
It is, and might I add that it's also English speaking.
Yeah,
it's part of the English speaking Caribbean, having been a former colony of England.
Indeed, and there it is. So it's an independent country now, of course, with a constitution guaranteeing freedom and rights and privileges of every Jamaican citizen, but that hasn't always been the case.
Certainly not. Jamaica came out of a history of colonialism, and of course, many people will know that colonialism had with it the indignity of African slavery. And the majority of people that were taken to Jamaica by England were from West Africa mainly. And then after slavery was abolished a long time ago, actually in Jamaica in 1834, then they had Indian, Chinese, and other smaller minorities that were taken in to do what was referred to as indentured service. So it was not slavery, but if you look back at the history, if you talk to the historians who have studied this, they will tell you that it was just a little better than slavery.
So a complicated, interesting history. And we might know Jamaica for tourism and reggae, of course, but what are some other key parts of the culture and key pieces of the economy?
Jamaica is interesting. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Jamaica has as great a history as any other country in the world. There are people there, obviously. There are lots of different kinds of cultural prowess which is exhibited in Jamaica. And the musical forms are not restricted to just reggae. There are other types of music that came out over the years that have been very, very interesting. Lots of very significant writers, historians, academians, and others who write out of Jamaica and are well known around the world. Of course, remember, Jamaicans are not static. They don't remain in Jamaica. Me being a good example of that. And so Jamaicans have actually been involved in all avenues of culture, religion, academics, and so on across the world. And so the country is a cauldron of, I want to use it in the right context, it's a cauldron of interesting peoples and products that comes out of their origins in colonialism, slavery, and other parts of some great culture.
Absolutely. And it also, of course, has agriculture and manufacturing. Financial service industry is kind of big. But back to agriculture, since that's what we often talk about here and your interests lie. Are there similarities between agriculture here in Vermont and Jamaica?
I recently took a walk down Church Street, and I've done this 100 times since I got to Burlington. And I noticed that there's a culture of coffee, Burlington coffee, Vermont coffee. Well, it's interesting. And coffee is a major crop grown in Jamaica. The mountains of Jamaica, Blue Mountain coffee is world famous, and very expensive type coffee. But beyond that, the kind of agriculture you'll see if you drive around Jamaica, particularly the countrysides, it will be subsistence agriculture. So there's smaller type arrangements where people grow or cultivate, about 2.5 acre plots of land and so on, mainly for their own use or for sale in the local produce markets. But there's also large agricultural, actually economies of scale in terms of coffee, sugarcane, and a few other things. And there are other types of agriculture, but mostly, for example, livestock agriculture. There's some dairy, there's beef, but mainly, if you see agriculture in Jamaica, it's usually small-scale subsistence agriculture.
Right, small farms. At the beginning of the program, I mentioned the H-2A visa program that helps Americans fill employment gaps by hiring workers from other countries. Why are there so many Jamaicans that happen to enroll in the program and help us out here in Vermont?
Jamaica has a history of actually providing workers, agricultural workers, to the United States. This actually began very, very early. In fact, way back in the early 1900s, Jamaicans were showing up in Florida and other parts of the southern United States to actually harvest sugarcane. And they've also been involved in apple harvesting in the northern part of the United States, as well as in Canada. There's a history of that. Jamaicans have never been restricted to the shores of Jamaica. They were involved, for example, in the digging, the excavation of the subway system in New York and other states that has that. So there's a rich history of Jamaicans migrating and taking advantage of higher wages in the United States and elsewhere, certainly back in Europe too. Over the years. So that history, I think, is actually what created the perpetuation of agriculture workers that you see in places like Vermont.
And much of this is really seasonal for the growing season. So they'll come up here for that season and then go back home.
Right. So most of these workers arrive in somewhere around May, and then they work right through that season. They do everything that is necessary to take care of the farm fields, and then they harvest everything else, and then they return home somewhere around October. Some of them November. But that's around the season for these workers. So probably 6 months or so.
Sure. After picking all those great apples, among many other things. So what about housing? Is this required by the government and or how does that work?
Yeah, the H-2 visa program actually has a number of very strict rules in there. Of course, I would not dare suggest that workers live in the lap of luxury. They have the basic amenities, but there are laws that govern the kinds of housing, what the housing has to be, how it needs to look, and it's inspected regularly also. So there are good rules, solid rules around this, and this exists across the United States wherever H-2 workers are required to do work in any kind of agricultural setting.
And I know that for many farms, this has been going on for decades, and they're friends, they know people. This has really been a long-term thing in Vermont, and I would imagine, is their life also off the farm for these workers?
Oh, that's interesting. I actually asked a young man that I met at a farm recently. He didn't get into the details, but he said, "Yeah, I do things. I go wherever people go. I go to the movies. I do all that other thing, all those other things." And he also interacts with local local people. Also, they make friends. Obviously, if you're working on a farm and there are people coming to shop or people coming to, to chat or so on, people interested in culture, in music, those kinds of exchanges happen regularly. And so he felt quite at home coming up to Vermont every year, and told me that he feels right at home. In fact, he doesn't know what he'll do if he's not in Vermont and doing this kind of work. I suppose he has equal interest in living here as much as he has going back home.
Right, fantastic, and we're great. People were able to come up because last summer was complicated with COVID and people not feeling really safe to come up to the United States. And during their time that they're away from home, how do they make family connections? Is everybody on a cell phone, or how are those connections kept while they're up here for 6 months?
Yeah, that's interesting because that has evolved so interestingly over the years. I actually left Jamaica for college in 1985. You're talking about a long time ago. And I only went back to Jamaica for a brief period, then left again in 1992. And before I actually went to college, I know personally people from my community and other parts of Jamaica who went on farm worker programs. And back then, of course, they would write letters and so on, and then call from a telephone booth or from the farm phone and so on. These days, the WhatsApp app, is really the key connection to family back home. That is where they do their FaceTime type of engagement, and this is regular. And generally, it's easier now. So people no longer write letters. I hear. I haven't written one in a long time, and I don't think these farm workers are sending email, but certainly WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. All these new type technology in communications has changed the way people connect. So they stay very connected to their families and friends back home.
Fantastic. Yeah, WhatsApp seems to be that because it's free, right? Basically, pretty much. Once you have your phone. But it's a wonderful way to connect, and you still connect and with your family, I assume, in Jamaica.
I don't have a ton of family back in Jamaica right now. I do have some. I do have friends, but I do connect through WhatsApp. It's interesting. WhatsApp might be free in the United States, but in many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, there is a small fee that's charged for that service. So it's not necessarily absolutely free.
Great,
but it works.
Roy, I'm sorry, we just ran out of time. Roy Beckford, it's so wonderful to have you up here in Vermont and at the University of Vermont. Thank you for joining us.
I could talk to you for a ton of time, Fran. Thanks.
Indeed. And thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.